I'm excited. I just been camping out in the Gospels and kind of just meditating and reading through them and just spending a lot of hours just saying, Jesus, would you just speak to me, just kind of renew the Gospels to me, just renew your heart for who you are and what you did for us. And it's been great just to kind of go back in the Gospels, and for some reason I've always kind of slanted towards Paul's letters in the New Testament, and it's kind of been my favorite stuff. But just the last couple of months been camping out in the Gospels and been talking about who Jesus is, what has he done, and what is his heart. And tonight, last week we're in a series. You never know what I'm going to do, so I'm not even going to talk about series because I'm confusing. And I like to be confusing. I drive my wife nuts because I never know what I'm going to speak on until like the day of, as far as my heart and stuff like that. I mean, I have it all planned out, but then I just want to know what God's heart is for the day and stuff like that. But last week I brought up 3 words, if you weren't here, that Jesus did in every teaching moment that he did, okay? And you can start with the Gospels from Jesus' baptism to when he first called his disciples, to everything that Jesus did, there was a teaching moment for him. It was all designed for him to disciple a number of people, and for those people to again disciple other people. That was the design of what Jesus did, okay? As I said this morning, Jesus, if he wanted to build something that was big, obviously Jesus died, and it says that everybody in the world, he died for everybody in the world, so obviously he is big. But if Jesus wanted to build something, if Jesus wanted to do a church, and just perform miracles and do all this stuff and gather huge crowds and keep those crowds, he could have easily done that. He did that. And then all of a sudden he would say things and the crowds would be totally dispersed. So when you look at the heart of Jesus, yes, it was to touch different places. When you look at how he went through Galilee and Samaria and Jerusalem and back and forth through these different cities on the coast of the lakes there and so forth. But his ultimate goal, besides the cross, besides reconciliation, besides redeeming us in relationship back to the Father, was to teach and disciple his disciples and to mentor them. So every moment that he did was a teaching moment. So I want to encourage you, when you read through the Gospels, just stop and hesitate for a minute and say, Jesus, what did you teach? Why did you teach this particular thing in this situation? What were you teaching the disciples, and what were you trying to get them to learn at that time? So the 3 words I used last week, which I stole from a book called Wiki Church, are engage, equip, and empower. He uses 4 E words in there. The other one is establish. But I'm just using 3 and I'm still kind of in this series just talking about who is Jesus, or Jesus is, and so forth. And I just don't want to talk about the positive things that Jesus did, redemption and reconciliation and grace and mercy and all this kind of stuff. I want to kind of do the whole gamut. And obviously everything he did was grace and mercy and reconciliation. But there's a whole lot more if we just stop and say, okay, God, Jesus, what did you teach, and why did you teach it, and what did you want your disciples to get out of it? Because if you read the Gospels and you just meditate on them, there's a lot of times, and I would say actually most of the time, the disciples are going, what you talking about? We have no idea what you're talking about. Come over here, Jesus. Let's go to the next room because what's going on? What did you mean by this? So he started talking in parables. He talked in different stories. He was talking about kingdom business, talking about going away where they can't go, and talking about doing things that they're not going to be able to follow. And they're just going, man, we've been with this guy for 2 years. We've seen miracles. He's walked on water. Peter walked on water for a little bit. Then he fell in and got wet. And we've cast out demons. He sent us out, and we cast out demons, healed the sick, and raised the dead. Then why don't we know what he's talking about? So it's important for us to just stop and say, Jesus, what are you teaching us? And in Matthew 11:27, starting in 27, we're going to read through verse 30. And it goes so well with what Hunter shared tonight, and if my wife has no clue what I'm going to share, which is a bad thing on my part, not on her part, my son obviously has no clue what I'm going to share, that's for sure. Says, all things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those whom the Son chooses to reveal to him. And then he says this thing at the end of the Beatitudes that just should absolutely blow our minds. Jesus says this, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now, I want you to take this story that Jesus, he's with a crowd. We don't know how big the crowd is. We assume it's pretty big, because it says there's a lot of times there were some huge crowds around him. This situation in Matthew 11, and I'm going to go back to Matthew 6, where that was actually the end of the Beatitudes. I want us to picture Jesus talking to us today about the same thing he talked to them before. And I'm going to read part of this again, but I want to ask you a few questions that I don't want you to raise your hand. But I want you to consider these questions. How many of you are burdened and heavy laden? How many times, and I want you to think our culture now, okay? Not 2,000 years ago culture. That could be a different culture, but I want you to think today. How many relationships, now Lori and I have been senior pastors for 4 years, but we've pastored pretty much for almost all of our married life, starting in college and so forth. So we've walked with people a lot through different things. How many relationships have you, but not only you in this building, but people that have walked through very, very, very difficult relationships that have been stressful and burdensome, weary, where you just get depressed and dragged down and hurt and burnt out? How about jobs? How about relationships that aren't man and wife or boyfriend, girlfriend, but family members and friends and different things, where you just think of all these things in our life, and then Jesus says, "Come to me, everybody who's heavy laden, everybody who has burdens, everybody who is just burnt out, walking down the wrong road." And every time we walk down the wrong road, the enemy just punches us in the face and just blasts us with a 2x4 to the forehead, and we just get knocked over and thrown in the ditch, because we're walking in this world, whereas as Christians, and if you're not a Christian in here, if you are, you walk in this basically dichotomy of, we're supposed to walk in the kingdom of God, but yet we have on this other side the kingdom of darkness. And I don't think there's anybody in here that would deny that there is a kingdom of darkness, and it is dark. And I have seen people month after month and year after year get taken and just snatched away from Jesus' hands, because the enemy comes in when you press forward with God and you begin to try to live out this life of rest in Jesus, this relationship with Jesus Christ. The enemy comes in like a flood and grabs you and tries to pull you out of that. And there's this fight that's going on. All those things that we deal with, Jesus says, "Come to me." And the last part of this, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. And I don't want you to raise your hand, but in your deepest, darkest place right now, how many of you are looking for rest for your soul? Think about that. That is an awesome thing to be in. Now, go back to Jesus' culture. Because if you read through the Bible and you go through Revelation, Jesus dies and resurrection and then ascends on high to the Father, and these churches start in Jerusalem and all these different cities, and you go look through Revelation 1, 2, and 3, and there's this mass tribulation on the church. I mean, I'm talking people are dying, Christians are being crucified. I mean, Satan is having his way with Christians because he hates anything that God does. And Jesus preaches a message, says, come to me if you're heavy laden. I would think that they were pretty heavy laden. Now, it's different than our culture today. It's way different in a lot of ways. But there was some heavy burdens going on. Families being pulled out of their houses, being pulled down to the streets, I mean, all sorts of stuff happening. And Jesus is offering them and saying, even in your deepest, darkest, hardest trial, when Dick Iverson came here a few weeks ago, we talked about storms. It was an awesome message. And guess what? We all are going to go through them. But when you go through a storm, and these are the 3 E's I want you to think about tonight. When we go through a storm, you can be in total rest and peace in Jesus Christ. It might hurt, devastate you sometimes, but there is a place that Jesus is offering you, which is an awesome place. The hard thing, and here's where we get into the engaging our culture, equipping those around us, not only here tonight, but outside of this building that you guys have influence over, that I don't really have influence over, and also empowering them. And I'm going to get back to that in a minute in a passage in Acts. Now I want you to go to Matthew chapter 6, and I'm just going to kind of read through this. It's the end of Jesus' teaching on the Beatitudes. And he's talking about heart condition, exactly what Hunter talked about tonight. And I appreciate that because one thing that Lori and I never ever want to do is show nepotism, that, hey, we're in ministry, so our kids are automatically in ministry. No, that's up to God. And if God puts them in ministry, obviously, Cole's doing worship and all sorts of stuff. It's really up to them and God. Obviously, we want what's best for our kids, just like you guys want what's best for your kids. But it's just awesome to see, even though Hunter grew up in our house and, he's been in church all his life, he still has to deal with his heart. He's even though he's a PK, guess what? PKs get it worse when the enemy comes in. And if the enemy wants to take anybody out, it's people in ministry or their kids, because he loves to do that. He loves to destroy families. So it's awesome to see Hunter's heart just saying, God, change my heart, because my heart needs to be changed. And Jesus, right here in Matthew 6, you talk about engaging and confronting his culture. He is going right after it. The cool thing about Jesus is he does it in a very humble way. And he's just teaching them. And he's telling them what life's going to be like and what life needs to be like. He's not yelling and screaming at them. He's not throwing rocks at them and screaming at them, you stupid so-and-so. He's just teaching them that if you want peace in your life, if you want just the very bare relationship with God, that you could walk through a very, very, very difficult time and be in complete rest in Jesus Christ. It's very possible. A lot of Christians go through a hard time and, oh my gosh, the world's going to end. They freak out and they just start running. There was a story when I was in basic training in the Army at Fort Benning, Georgia in 1984. I grew up in the country. I was pretty calm, cool, and collective. I didn't freak out about anything. I mean, I was packing guns around when I was 6. That's how I grew up, okay? I didn't grow up in the city. And we had to go in the gas chamber. And you've probably all heard about that before, where you go in this gas chamber, you have your gas mask on, you're sitting there breathing, the drill sergeant just looking at you. Joe knows what I'm talking about, and maybe some others in here too, that they're looking, they start smiling at you, and they start lighting these things on fire, and all of a sudden the smoke starts billowing out of these things in the middle of the room, and you're all lined around the room, and they say, take your mask off. And a lot of guys are going, I don't want to do it. They're freaking out because they're just freaking out. And the big drill sergeant comes up and he just grabs your mask. He just rips it off. Then he holds you against the wall until you breathe it in a few times. And then he allows you to go out the door. And probably because most of these guys were just knuckleheads, probably 90% of them barely made it to the door because they were breathing in CS gas and you were just like choking out and doing all this kind of stuff. And it was so funny because the drill sergeants warned us. We're at Fort Benning, Georgia. There's a lot of big pine trees down there. And right outside the door of this gas house, whatever they call it, there are big boy pine trees, like this big around, 200 feet tall. And they say, don't run when you get out there. Try to get in the wind if there's any wind. Do not rub your eyes because you're just going to be bawling your face off and snot and everything's going to be coming out. Don't rub your eyes and don't run. 90% of the guys make it to the door and they just start screaming, man. They're running, they're rubbing their eyes, and they're just screaming, they're freaking out. These are all the guys that you don't want to be with in a foxhole because when the bullets fly, man, they're going to start screaming and shouting and they're going to draw attention. And 3 or 4 of the guys are just running and just boom, right into the pine trees and just flat on their back, screaming, rubbing their eyes. You don't have to do that. When you go through a storm and you're getting gassed out by the enemy, don't be thinking stuff like farting or anything like that. Gassed out storm-wise. When the enemy's attacking you and going after you, do not freak out. Stop. Go against the culture that the world says to do. The world says, me, myself, and I freak out. I get what I want to do what I want. Stop what you're doing. Find your anchor, who is Jesus Christ. There is peace and there is rest in Jesus. And Jesus teaches, he just says this, and it's so awesome. Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourself treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves cannot come in. Where your treasure is, your heart will be there also. Now, life is a journey with Jesus, okay? That means as we walk down the journey of life, God's going to reveal to us where our heart really is. We're going to go into circumstances where we think we're going to walk through and do all right, and we're just going to get destroyed, we're going to mess up, we're going to do all sorts of dumb things. Those situations are to reveal to us where our heart really is. And at that point, Jesus is telling you, stop and slow down, come to me. I am the anchor point. I'm the one, if you want to go against culture that says, scream and shout and just raise all sorts of you-know-what, stop, because I am the one that can give you rest. I am the one that will deliver peace to your life in a time of trouble. Now, we are going to walk through trouble. So let's keep on reading. And it says this, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Now, what was Jesus talking about here? Well, let's engage culture here for a second. Our culture tells us to do what? Store up earthly treasure. Our culture tells us make sure we're prepared for retirement, which is obviously not a bad idea. We have to be good stewards of what God has given us. I'm not saying not to be good stewards, but our culture tells us totally opposite to do what Jesus is telling us to do. Our culture says do whatever you want, whenever you want, watch whatever you want, listen to whatever you want, read whatever you want. I told a story this morning of a couple people that I knew back at City Harvest Church in Vancouver. They had supposedly given their heart to the Lord. It was a young adult function, and we met weekly and monthly and so forth. And These particular two guys I was talking about, man, they were so on fire for Jesus. You would have thought, man, they were just going crazy for God, and man, they were so spiritual because they could talk and they could do, ooh, baby. I mean, you talk about, I want to be like that person. And then a week would go by, and a month, and 2 months, and 6 months, and so forth, and all of a sudden the fire of God is just totally weighing down. There is no more fire in their life. And I'm getting to know these two guys and so forth, and going out to lunch with them and coffee and getting to talk with them. And then one guy, we're talking at Applebee's one night, and I did not ask him anything offensive, but I just asked him, so how are you really doing? What are you really doing? What are you reading? What are you watching? And you would have thought, man, I was the devil. All of a sudden, you could just see within him, he wanted to follow God, and he wanted to do what he wanted to do in the world. He wanted to live in his sin, and he didn't want me to pinpoint his sin. But when you talk about prophecy, raising the dead, healing the sick, and preaching the gospel in front of crowds, all this stuff he wanted to do, and he felt he was called to do all those things. But when it came time to not look at pornography and not to read these stupid worldly novels that just get you so into what's going on and all this stuff he was doing, the next day I talked to him and I go, man, did I offend you? Because, man, something just didn't seem like, I was just talking to you last night, and he hated me after that. Never came back to church. He was so offended with me that I would question his walk with God. And he was so offended. But Jesus is telling us right here, whatever you put in your eyeballs goes down here. And however we think tough we are, or we could handle it, or whatever it is, Jesus is teaching us right here, plain and simple. He is saying, if your eyes are bringing in darkness, your heart is going to be dark. So we have a choice. Are we going to listen to our culture, or are we going to engage and confront our culture, not be butt heads to our culture, but are we going to be like Jesus to our culture? And are we going to learn to engage and equip and teach others to do the same, to walk in what Jesus wants us to walk in? And he goes on, and I'm going to skip down, verse 20, I think it's 24. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one, love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You can't serve God and the world. You can't serve God and money. That's why Jesus taught, follow me, means you die to your world. You die to yourself, and then you live to Jesus Christ. Then he goes on, and he says some things that really confront our culture. I mean, you talk about being black and white dichotomy against our culture. This is Jesus speaking. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than these? Can any of you, by worrying, add anything to your life? Can you add an hour to your life? Can you add a day to your life by stressing out? Now, we have a doctor here, and I've read many, many articles, but probably one of the biggest killers in the world, obviously there's different diseases and all sorts of stuff, but really a big thing that causes a lot of biological reactions in our body to go downward is stress and worry. And when we begin to stress and worry, especially as Christians, life is not fun. Whether it's about relationships, it doesn't matter what it is, but if we are totally just focused and stressed out and discontent and so just like, man, what do I do? I can't handle life anymore. It's because we're not in right relationship with Jesus. If there's hurts from the past, they can be forgiven and gotten over. If there's unforgiveness toward people in our lives, I talked to a person a couple days ago, not a Christian, and they're hurt, and they said, you know what? I have a sister and a brother that did this 25 years ago. I'll never forgive them. No matter what happens, I'll never, ever forgive them. Well, you know what? That person is a hurting puppy. It's a hurting puppy. And unless they want to walk in the way Jesus wants them to walk, Jesus can't forgive them. Because Jesus said, unless you forgive, I can't forgive you. And he goes on to say, and why do you worry about clothes? See the flowers of the field? They don't labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor or glory was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothed the grass of the field, which is here and then today and gone tomorrow and thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after these things. Now, again, catch what Jesus is. He's sitting in a place, rock field, wherever they're at, and he's saying, all the things that the world goes after, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, power, control, more stuff, hoard more stuff, whatever that is, Jesus says, the pagans go after those things. Don't store up for yourself things that are eventually just going to rot and be stolen away from you. The only thing that's going to do any good for your life and the ones around you are the things you store up in heaven. And that is relationship with God, learning how to walk what Jesus is walking out in this rest and peace. There's nothing more powerful. I believe in miracles. I believe in trying to lay hands on the sick and praying in Jesus' name be healed and casting out. I believe all that stuff is for today, the power of the Holy Spirit. But I'm telling you what, I love to be around people who know how to walk with Jesus and who are plugged into Jesus and have peace. So if you're sitting here tonight and there's something in your life you know, it's kind of like a needle in your side that you just can't get out, and every time you walk you just feel that needle. It just hurts and it's painful, and it's a spiritual thing, and it's a relationship thing, or it's a family thing, or whatever it is, and it's just painful. If you have something in your life that's painful, and I'm not necessarily talking about physical pain, I'm talking about spiritual pain, relationship pain, don't walk anymore with that. Because why? Jesus said what? Did Jesus invite us to come to him? He did, right? I read it, right? Jesus said, come to me, all you who have needles in your side, and every time you walk, you're full of pain. All of you that have broken relationships, all you who have anything going on in your life that is painful in some way, Jesus says, I will give you rest. But he said something that you got to do. You got to come to him. Without coming to him, it's just going to be a pain that's only going to get hurt worse and deeper and deeper and deeper. And then he goes on this and says this in verse 33, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will take worry for itself. Each day has its own trouble of its own. The Message Bible in verse 33, I love it because it says, take all your attention, or pay all your attention to the kingdom of God. Now, how do we get rid of stuff in our life? How do we stop the darkness that comes through our eyes? Obviously, we got to put the computer down sometimes. Obviously, we got to quit reading certain things. We got to quit spending as much time in front of the tube or whatever that is. That's stuff that you guys know you have to quit doing in order for light to shine in our eyes so our heart is more healthy. But how do we deal with these things? Jesus says, very simply, come to him. He will give you rest. Now, last week I talked about engaging and equipping and empowering people and engaging our culture. This right here engages our culture more than anything in the world. Our culture is all about sex, drugs, rock and roll, Hollywood, who's popular now, how many people are trying to be like so-and-so, who is totally messed up in their heart. If we only knew how messed up Hollywooders were and how desperate they are for a relationship with God, we would go, oh my gosh, why do I even watch those people? But we don't. We're enamored by this, oh my gosh, we got to be like it. And Jesus is saying, no. If you want to walk in peace, the pain that's in your heart, if you want that to go away, and if you want to teach others how to get rid of the pain in your heart, you run to Christ. And He offers complete rest. Now, I don't know how to explain that other than I try to live it. I'm definitely not perfect. I definitely still sin. I definitely still mess up sometimes, just like the Apostle Paul said he did. But you know what? I'm not bothered by life. And I'm not trying to be like anybody else. Because you know what? I'm not this charismatic dude and all this kind of stuff. But you know what? I am just as happy to be sitting on a mountaintop somewhere, reading my Bible, enjoying Jesus. Because that is it. That is the pinnacle of life, knowing that I am plugged in to the vine. Jesus said, and He is the great example, right? Why was He so peaceful? Why was He so humble? Why would Jesus not freak out about anything going on in His life? Because He was plugged in to the Father, and He didn't do anything in life unless the Father told Him to do it. Well, isn't that an example for us? Jesus said, come to me and I will give you rest. Pain, hurt, no matter what you have, I can give you rest. I'm the only one that can actually restore unto you a way of life that there's no unforgiveness, there's no hatred, there's no like I want to get even or I want to get vengeful of this person, I hate this person. All that can be taken away if you come to Christ and just say, Lord, I can't handle this anymore. A yoke is something, a wooden little frame where two horses or two ox are walking down, plowing a field. They're tied together with this yoke and they can't get out from underneath of it. You either carry the yoke of pain and sin or depression, whatever yoke is on your life that you physically cannot take off, you either continue to carry that or you say, Jesus, I want to believe your words because Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, how many want that? I want that.